Hey, I'm Scott. If we've never met before, grateful that you're here today, grateful that you'd be with us. I wonder how you might respond right now if these two words showed up on your cellular device. The two words that just say, call me. Maybe it depends on who it comes from. Right? If, you know, the reply all guy in your office may get a different response from you than, say, your mother. But that phrase, call me, likely, if you're anything like me, evokes some feelings. It evokes some feelings that may include just the panic of the moment to be certain that certainly bad news is afoot. Or, at the very least, that a disruption to the plan you just made for the day that you were kind of excited about is about to be... Or maybe it is the feeling that you are about to be rejected because they didn't want to put it in writing. They didn't want to send it to you over text. They want to give you 8 corollaries of explanation about why they can't hang out this particular day or why they are in fact not coming. Or the phrase call me can evoke this tension of the things we've experienced in the past, the circumstances of our present tense projected into a future situation. And that's the Ghosts of Christmas series in a nutshell. The joy that Lydia speaks about, available to daughter Zion, to Israel, this promise of hope and peace and joy and love available to us as the one who has come in the Messiah, being haunted by the scandals and shame of our past, the circumstances in our present tense, and maybe how we've responded with entitlement or cynicism. But then really, truly, deeply, an anxiety, almost a paralysis of fear, or the clutching of control as it relates to our future. So that's where we are if you haven't been with us before. We've used 2 sources to help us think about the ways in which hope and joy and peace and love are haunted in our midst. We've used the Charles Dickens classic, A Christmas Carol, and we've used the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 1 and 2. So we'll continue on that journey today by looking at the idea of the ghosts of Christmas yet to come. And as we work through this particular passage, our aim is twofold. It will be to see the ways in which an open-handed posture of faithfulness is available to us in this Christmas yet to come, or the posture of fear and control as we face the ghosts of Christmas yet to come. So we're going to work through Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. I'm going to stop here and there and offer a few tidbits and editorial notes, just hopefully to help enhance your understanding of the text, not be a distraction as I do it. You can tell me afterwards whether or not I did that correctly. Matthew chapter 2 is where we're going to be, 1 through 12. We'll work through this verse over the next few minutes. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." All right, here we go. 3 observations, things to note from the text. Number 1, you may already have noticed, Jesus is already born in this passage. All the stuff you surround and think about when it comes to your nativity set, a lot of that comes together from Luke's account of the text. So Matthew's account of the text, because Matthew wants you to understand that Jesus is the fulfillment of the things that Lydia was just reading about. This 400 years of silence has been broken. The Messiah has burst forth. He's going to make a lot of allusions to things and a lot of details that make sense specifically to a Jewish audience. So he's going to jump ahead and tell you what happens after the birth. Jesus is born during the reign of Herod the Great, which dates Jesus' birth probably to 6 to 4 BC, okay? Because Herod the Great dies in 4 BC. So this is Herod the Great, Herod I, who reigns for over 30 years. We're going to talk about him a great deal in just a few moments. So that's observation number one. We've got these magi from the east. What's their deal? They are Zoroastrian prophets or astrologers. They could have come as far as Babylon, perchance. Part of why we read the Zephaniah passage is because the Babylonians would be familiar with like some of the promises of the Hebrews. And the Jewish audience, that because they were occupied there as a captive people for some time. And so what we know is they've come from the east, maybe as far as Babylon, so up to 800 miles away, possibly a journey that's taken 40 days or more, and they've got an entourage with them. We tend to think of three, and we give them names and all that good stuff, but there's an entourage likely with this group. And then lastly, this entourage makes its way to Jerusalem. Right? But Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Jesus was born 6 miles south of Jerusalem. So they've missed. They didn't. Did they? And what happened here? Did they not listen to their GPS system? So the star that they were following, more on that in a few, takes them to close enough. And then what does it seem that they do? They get their way to Jerusalem. Why? Because it makes sense to go to Jerusalem. It's the city center. They find themselves in Herod's kingdom. So they go to the place where they would presume the king of the Jews would be. Amongst the one, Herod the Great, who calls himself that. So that's where they end up. They end up in the palace of Herod the Great, and they begin to banter with like this incident of like, well, what's up with, where is this king? All right, so verse 2, 1 and 2, verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So King Herod has a bit of a reputation, we're going to find out, with the history and the text, as being a paranoid control freak of sorts. And what do the paranoid control freaks in your life not like? Surprises. They don't like surprises. I don't like surprise parties, if you were thinking of throwing me one. Why? Because I don't like the idea of not, like, a group of people being in on a secret that I didn't know, talking about a thing. It evokes something in me. Probably something very Herod-like that exists in you too. More on that in a few minutes. Like, Herod is disturbed by the fact that this group from the east has come looking for the promised Messiah of the Hebrews, and he didn't have any clue it was happening, so he's disturbed. Now, did everybody get an alert to their phone? Like, all of Jerusalem's disturbed with him? No, but Matthew doesn't think highly of Herod the Great, nor does Josephus or anyone else that talks about him from a lot of the source material. So what do people who are a bit cantankerous and have a bit of a mean streak when they don't get their way do? They cast a shadow on everybody. So this phrase, all of Jerusalem's disturbed with him, is kind of a ripple effect of like, when Herod ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right? Like this ripples. He does not like the idea, A, that there is a king of the Jews in competition with him, and B, that these guys came from 800 miles away up to worship somebody that's not him. So it sends him in a bit of a spiral. What does he do with that? Verse 4, when he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet was written, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So he goes to his teachers, he goes to his religious leaders, he goes to his experts in Hebrew scriptures and finds out a thing that either he had forgotten or was not acquainted with, that this has been predicted, this has been prophesied, and so Bethlehem is the place to get to, 6 miles south of the current location where everyone's gathered in the place, wrestling with looking for the King of the Jews. So whether he doesn't know it or he's forgotten it, he now passes this on to the Magi. Look at what he does. Herod called the Magi secretly found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." Couple of quick editorial notes there. He does it in secrecy. Why? Because the religious leaders and the scribes are not going to like what he has in mind for this newborn king. They're going to wrestle with, in their own way, the implications of, is this the Messiah? But that's not what Herod's interested in wrestling with. He's interested in stamping out a threat. But Herod the Great is a politician. And so what does one do if they are persuasive in a political sphere? We'll enable someone else to gather this intel. We'll enable someone else to get the news. So he gives the Magi enough to make the Magi feel like he's served them and to send them on their way with the explicit instruction to report back to him so that he can go with his entourage and worship this king as they have. If you keep reading, you're going to find out that what he has in mind is to kill the child, to stamp out the threat to his throne. Verse 9, after they heard the king, they went on their way, they being the Magi, and the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. So if we pause there for a minute, we've got this star leading them, the star that's led them up to this point, now leading them south. We are not told by Matthew if this is a supernatural star or if this is a natural phenomenon happening in a supernatural way for their particular journey as astrologers. That's not a thing that we are told by Matthew, but what we are told is the thing that got them up to 800 miles onto the journey takes them now, the final 6, to where they're supposed to be. Verse 11, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So you'll notice there, we're not at the manger scene anymore. We're not at the manger scene. We're not, so I know your nativities have the Magi there. It's not theologically accurate. We'll get to why they're there in a minute. They come later. Jesus may be 18 months old, up to 2 years old at this point in time. We can see probably 2 years or under based on what Herod is about to do in trying to have the children of the village killed. They go and they worship, if you can imagine, an entourage from Babylon making their way to this small town in modern-day Palestine with gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And if this is a relative's house or this is where Mary and Joseph have decided to settle down, we got a carpenter and a new mom. This is going to make a scene. You know, gold, frankincense, and myrrh are not the kinds of things that in small town Bethlehem are just things that everybody's got. These are wealthy, extravagant gifts fit for a king in a very blue-collar, working class, trying by all means to make ends meet in the oppression of Herod and his reign kind of way. And then verse 12, having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So the Magi who appear in verse 7 to not be in on what Herod was up to have either figured it out or been communicated with that they need to not go back to Jerusalem because Herod is a threat to this child's life, and they make their way back east, going a different way and not following the instructions that they were given. Verses 13 to 18, which we'll talk about more next week, Herod's going to double down. He's going to chase Mary and Joseph out of Bethlehem towards Egypt, and he's going to have the children of the village killed that are under 2 years old in a way to preserve himself. So what have we got here? We've got 2 approaches to the call me text. 2 approaches to, there's news that is changing the course of the future. There's something available now that's changing the circumstances as everybody knows them. And what we have is what I'll call the open-handed approach of the Magi and the closed-fisted approach of Herod. They're both approaches to the future. The approach of the Magi is pretty simple to summarize. And it's kind of where we'd like to think that we are as it relates to the concept of joy. Open-handed, ready to receive it. What do? They're the outsiders in this story. They're not Jewish. They're acquainted with Judaism in some form. Whether that's that they speak Hebrew and they're master readers of the scroll, or they dabbled a little bit and they read a few articles. Like they're interested, they've got this thing leading them and guiding them. It's not their God. And they go as outsiders to Jerusalem, looking earnestly with holy curiosity to pay their respects to this king. They come to the story and they come to the future with a holy curiosity, a faith and open-handedness that says, we'll sacrifice on that journey. It's disruptive to their status quo. It's disruptive to the other things they worship, but that's the journey they go on. Why do the Magi show up in your nativity scene? Because Matthew and others want you to not see this as an isolated story. That this is a promise that was ushered back from the book of Genesis through Abraham, that this covenantal God is connecting and blessing people who are the outsiders in the story. Inviting people that this king is not just the king of the Jews, but he is the king of the Jews, but that promise, that covenant is going to extend beyond those who have that origin story, and they are the picture of that, which is why it shows up anecdotally. I dropped this gold deer that we got at Target in the middle of the nativity scene to be a brat during the Christmas setup, and I got scolded for that appropriately by the powers that be. And when I was scolded for that, I said to my wife, well, it's just as theologically accurate as the wise men being in this scene. What's the deal, right? They're there to show us Genesis 12:3. That what has happened here is extending beyond here. And that these guys and this entourage bringing their gifts is available to them through the person and work of Jesus. And by proxy, available to you and I, who are the outsiders of the story. And if we were just thinking about the Magi, we would go, now this is the joy that's available to you. May you receive it open-handedly. And we would think to ourselves, yes, I would like that. But you're probably more like Herod. And I'm probably more like Herod than we'd like to admit. So let's talk about this guy. Herod is not open-handed about the future. He's fearful. He's anxious. He spirals in control. He's paranoid. But he's also really good at what he does to keep everything spinning. And isn't this the tension we often feel? The things that get us to the place of accomplishment, the things that get us to be successful in our job, that get us the promotions, they kind of work for us until they don't. They're pretty good at preserving a status quo, but when they look forward into the future with any kind of change up or any kind of trajectory, it's just another spiral. And Herod, you don't like the comparison, nor do I, because the man is known by Josephus to have killed 3 wives, at least 1 son, and committed some kind of genocide in the town of in the town of Bethlehem towards a number of children. We'll talk about that more next week. So it feels like a bit of a apples and oranges comparison, right? Because you've not done those things, I would suppose. But let's look behind it. Let's do the wicked thing and look at the story behind the story. Behind these actions are a paranoia, a control, a fear, a gripping onto the wheel to keep everything functional. Herod is really, really gifted, in a sense. He's aligned to Rome, has a 30-year relationship with Rome. He worked with Mark Antony historically. He speaks Greek fluently, which kind of makes him an everyman, adaptable in all spaces and places. He's really good at manipulating things. I mentioned in week 1 that when he found out he was a bit of a mudblood in terms of Jewish origin story, he conveniently had those records destroyed. And even though Josephus tells us, the great antiquities historian, that everybody kind of knew he wasn't purely Jewish, everybody was scared enough of him just to kind of let it be the narrative. He does some things that are convenient for the Jews. He works with Rome to exempt them from military service. He keeps the oppressors at bay, and the only thing you got to trade that in for is his own brand of oppression. He's built structures that are still standing today that you could see like they're still up. He's gifted in a lot of ways. The tragedy of Herod is that he has the ability and the capability to be the ultimate hype man for Jesus. But that would mean relinquishing the ring of power. So Herod is really remembered more as a footnote. He's remembered as sort of the contrast to the king that's come. He's a tragic story. But I can't help but see myself in him as it relates to how I often approach the future, how I am often haunted by the future. Skilled, but perhaps using it for self-preservation. Wise enough to know that I don't have control, but unwilling to relinquish control in particular areas of my life. Maybe talented enough to hold everything together for a little bit and even be impressive along the way. How does he do it? Leadership-oriented, but this is where it may extend beyond, right? But baked in self-reliance, and maybe even moving to times, whether you do it or not, where you begin to think aloud, maybe the ends do justify the means. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. Saying the right things publicly, but privately being unwilling to submit our lives to the way of Jesus. Able to play a role in the healing of the world around us. Herod certainly has those capabilities. Talked about this in some time in the series, the last series, where there was in his mighty fortress enough food for 1,000 people to eat for 5 years. But people in Mary and Joseph's town are likely barely scraping by and barely making it. We probably have a lot more in common with Herod as it relates to the way we process the ghosts of the future than we'd like to admit. Close-fisted, trying to hold it all together, control, spin. It's all on me, it's all on our backs. So when you fast forward to the ghost of Christmas yet to come and Ebenezer Scrooge, let's think about him for a minute. We haven't talked about him in about 20 minutes. When Ebby hits the ghost of Christmas yet to come, the ghost is silent. And Ebenezer Scrooge is left to piece together, based on what he sees, what the narrative and trajectory of his story is going to be. All this stuff that he's acquired when he dies is going to be picked over not by his family members and people he loves, if he loves anybody, but by grave robbers. He's going to die alone with nobody visiting him. He sees the grave. And he gets a glimpse of Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim and the family weeping because this young boy that his generosity could have helped or given a better life has instead impacted the Cratchit family in a way that Tiny Tim is no longer with them. And it's at this point in the Christmas Carol that Ebenezer Scrooge breaks. And he breaks in a way that, historically speaking, Herod doesn't seem to. Herod's going to double down, go to the village, and kill children, removing himself from it in a way. We'll talk about that again more next week. The story for you and I is none of us have control of what the next hour, the next 6 hours, the next day, the next 10 years of our life. We don't have control, but we have agency. What will we do with our agency? You have talents, you have abilities, you have a particular set of skills that have gotten you to a place of survival up to this point. Will you approach the future with which you do not have control through the trajectory of an open-handed posture? Or will you, like Herod, clutch the wheel with such a death grip that it takes you to places you never thought it would take you and leads you to justify things you would otherwise never justify? I want to do a quick tactile exercise as we move to communion and begin to wrap up. I just want you to make a fist, just make fists really quick. And you don't have to like hold them out over your head or anything like that, but you can just do this and just get mad for a minute. Think about Anthony Santander as a Yankee. I don't like that. Think about the Browns game and the Raiders game and a whole lot of other underperforming games. Or think about some real life circumstances that are troubling to you. Like I just, as I'm sitting here like editorializing with you and trying to be lighthearted, there's really painful things too that you can probably think of that represent a very Herod-like stance. But I'm belaboring this because two things. I want to just illustrate something that's true of a Herod-like existence. If you're anything like me, your palms are hurting a little bit because there's some claws you didn't know you had. But also, I can begin to feel it in my shoulders. I can begin to feel it other places in my body, right? This kind of life is painful and it's exhausting. That's where a lot of us are. This posture, and you can make it, feels really good when you unfold your hands. But it's not natural. Right? It's not a natural posture. It requires putting yourself with your agency into some space. This posture traditionally is a posture of receiving, which a lot of us who are successful doers don't like as much. It's a posture of gratitude, which intellectually makes sense to us, but the spiral of our circumstances doesn't often make room for. It's a posture of pleading, help. The ghost of Christmas yet to come is really a choice with our own agency to move from this to this. I want to offer 4 challenges or reflections upon that as we move to communion. In communion, what we celebrate is that king has disrupted our story in the most beautiful of ways. That the presence of God has stepped near you as an outsider. That while you were still a sinner, while you didn't have the perfect theology, while you didn't XYZ, the love of God moved near you. And that the kingdom that is ushered in through that sacrifice supersedes any kind of kingdom that you could build with your tiny hands. And that the Herods of the story are footnotes to that greater story. So communion really is a journey like this, to address our relationship with control and fear, right? When we come to the Lord's table, when we come back to the Lord's seat, looking at the areas of our life where control and fear are winning. To, unlike Herod, unfold our hands and pay attention to the ways that we've coped with that reality. To, like the Magi, let ourselves be disrupted by the love of God. You may feel like you're too busy, but I would argue to a room of achievers, you're too busy not to let God's love disrupt your status quo. And then lastly, like the Magi, respond in worship. Not just with our presence, but with our gifts, with our abilities to bring beauty into a world where other kingdoms are bringing exploitation as a result of this king's arrival. That's what we celebrate in communion. I want to pray for you as we enter that time. Lord, we come to the table probably more like Herod in some way than we'd like to admit. And I really want to distance myself from that because he's gross. But Lord, would you show to us the ways in which fear and control and manipulation and trying to keep everything spinning is exhausting us and hurting us? Lord, versus the ways that we can respond with giving what we have, taking the next right step, and letting holy curiosity at your presence and arrival change the trajectory of our lives and the lives around us. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.